Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the In Full Swing podcast. And this week, I am joined from Luke Hatfield from the Express and Star and the Albion podcast. How are you doing, mate?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're just speaking a little bit off air, straight away into the into the football season, really, and what's going on towards the back end of it. Post lockdown, Luke, best place to start. How have the Baggies been?
It's been an interesting restart, put it that way. It wasn't the best start for them, so to speak. They had a derby clash with Birmingham City, which was a drab 0-0, and then they went and lost to Brentford, who have obviously just been on a fantastic roll. After that, they picked up. They got a big result against Sheffield Wednesday. Then they moved on with a big win over Hull, and then they got put in a really good performance against Derby. But then, of course, the game which has got every Albion fan nervous now has been that 1-1 draw with Blackburn. I mean, Albion played really well that day. They literally couldn't find a way to put the ball in the back of the net after getting the first. They hit the post. They had a number of great chances, but in the end, Blackburn hit them late on with a bit of a counter attack, and then after that, Blackburn could have well won that game. So it's been an interesting restart, put it that way. I think the big issue for a lot of Albion fans is the form of Brentford, because I don't think any of them expected to put the run that they have managed together, and all of a sudden that gap between the top two of Leeds and West Brom has been decimated from what was at one point double digits now to just a solitary 3 points.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I think obviously prior lockdown it was plain sailing, really, wasn't it, for both clubs? I mean, you were looking at Brentford and you thought, right, now, so I think it was 11 points actually. They were just in and behind Fulham, and you thought, okay, but them coming back into the four, it's made things, I guess, a lot more interesting for the neutral, but stressful for fans of West Brom and Leeds United. I guess a good question, because obviously we're going to make it, a bit transparent across the clubs, Luke, is what are your thoughts on Brentford?
I tell you what, they look a great side, don't they? I mean, you looked at their season, and initially when Albion and Leeds did have that big gap, you thought, oh, Brentford, they're not all that. I mean, they've been through a fair bit of change. I mean, Dean Smith departed the club along with a couple of players. I mean, they did well to keep hold of the likes of Saeed Benrahma, I think. That was an important one for them. But now you look at them and they're just rolling win after win after win. They've got such a really solid team ethic. It reminds you a little bit of Sheffield United last season, I think.
I've said that, yeah.
Just the way that they've kind of managed to build this system and deal with some departing players. But, it's always that kind of singular focus from them. And now all of a sudden they look like one of, if not the best team in the Championship all of a sudden. So despite West Brom and Leeds having, basically bossed their way in the top two and battling each other pretty much throughout most of the campaign, all of a sudden you've got this Brentford team who don't look like slowing down, and they look like a serious threat. And I mean, if they don't make that top two, they've got to be favourite for the playoffs, surely. Yeah,
I mean, you think a lot of people are talking about that potential 10-game winning run. I mean, you'd be absolutely wounded if you're a Brentford fan. You won 10 games on the trot and you managed to somehow finish outside the top two. Do you think they can sort of go all the way and win 10 in a row? Because I remember I was saying after 3, I was like, I can't see them letting up, really. I mean, they're just relentless. Obviously, Janssen at the back now. He seems to have sort of solidified a partnership with Ethan Pinnock as a back two. And they've got Marcondes, obviously, back from his loan spell. So it seems like those two have really given them a lift, doesn't it?
Yeah, they definitely have. And I mean, what a signing that was from Leeds. I mean, a fantastic centre-back in this league, Pontus Jansson, and obviously managing to secure him. And I think he fits their mould really, really well. So that was a great little bit of business from them. And then, like, you look elsewhere across the side and you do see a lot of quality. Benrahma is basically a Premier League player in waiting. You've got Ollie Watkins, who's obviously done so well this season. Brian Mbeumo, who's really stood out. And even the likes of Rico Henry, who I know has had some injury issues, but is really shining in that left back spot. And you look at that running that they've had, and the one thing I always thought was it's important how they start in the restart, because they had 2 big games. If you remember, the first one was Fulham, and then of course they had West Brom. If they win both of them, in terms of confidence, that's going to give them so much, and it did. I mean, visibly the players were lifted. The pressure wasn't really on them because no one really expected them to make them top 2 places. And I think the pressure is going to rise on them now when they see teams like, for example, West Brom, who obviously did slip up against Blackburn. Leeds almost slipped up against Swansea, barring that late Pablo Hernandez goal. I mean, if teams slip up and then they get an opportunity to actually get into that top two, I think that's when the pressure's really on them. But you look at their running and it's far from the worst in the world. So it wouldn't surprise me if they went on and won out from here.
Yeah, it's interesting, obviously, because, I mean, with the West Brom camp at the weekend, it's been crazy, really, Luke, because Leeds United seem to be playing at the back end of every single fixture. It's always West Brom, Brentford, then Leeds. So do you see it as sort of advantageous going last in that fixture spell, or do you think it's sort of better going first so it's just out of the way?
It's funny you mention this because I had this discussion with on our Albion podcast, actually, and I would always be in favour of playing first. You'd rather be the one to set the targets, I think. I mean, I know you would know what you can achieve and this and that, but the pressure's always on you when you're that first playing team. So you're always going to try and, give everything to get the result that you need. Whereas if a team slips up and, it's maybe West Brom slip up and then Albion and then Leeds, maybe look at that and they're like, oh, okay, so it's not the end of the world if we draw now. Whereas if you're playing first, obviously, you've got to feel like you've got to set that benchmark. For me, I'd always want to be the first team playing, but in terms of psychology, each manager, each club will obviously discuss that with their team and figure out the right tactics to do so. But for me, I'd always want to go first. But in the end, if you just go and win the games, it doesn't really matter when you play, does it?
Yeah, and I think that's also a testament to your team if you can go out there and sort of you've seen all your opposition play. I mean, I remember with Leeds last year, it was a battle between us and Sheffield United, and it was the issue was it was sort of a choppy and change. They'd go, we'd go, and even Adam Forshaw came out this season and said it was difficult mentally for Leeds to sort of deal with the fact that they were playing first all the time. And I think that's where it got a fair few people worried before the restart, really, just on the basis that Leeds were always going last. But it is really interesting, and you would expect sort of footballers to deal with that. But I guess with regards to West Brom, Luke, on a basic blueprint, really, Diangana, Pereira, Jay especially, what a purchase he's been. And did anyone sort of expect those three to be that good?
I think a lot of Albion fans maybe, saw that, Mateus Pereira, who was, this shining kind of like Brazilian flair player, was always going to offer a little bit of something. I didn't think they'd realise just how much he would offer. And he's quickly kind of cemented himself as one of the best players in the Championship and is now due to join Albion on a permanent deal with that loan. It's going to be made permanent purely because of the number of appearances he's made. There was an obligation to purchase him after that. So they're just waiting for basically the official club announcement. But obviously it's not the priority for them at the moment. Diangana obviously brought in on loan. I think a lot of West Ham fans were surprised to see him go out on loan, seeing what he had offered for them. But then with young players, you never quite know what you're going to get. But again, he's shone when he's been fit. Ajayi is the one you pointed out, and obviously an absolute bargain. I mean, a lot of people saw him at Rotherham and thought, oh yeah, like he's a decent goal scorer, centre back who can play in central defensive midfield, but he's playing for what is essentially a poor side in the Championship, and obviously has come to Albion and really stood out. I think the one thing which Slaven Bilic really loves about him is his pace. He's incredibly quick, so they can afford to play a really high line when he's in the 11, and it gives them so many opportunities to press teams much better than they could otherwise. But yeah, some of the business they've done has been absolutely superb. I mean, there's only been a few kind of questionable ones. I mean, the likes of Kenneth Zahor joined, for the best part of £10 million and hasn't really done it. Charlie Austin, obviously a massive name, but he came in fairly cheaply, to be honest. But it's kind of started slow and has begun to kind of find his feet. He doesn't offer the same kind of mobility as the players mentioned before, but elsewhere, like players who have kind of maybe slipped between the cracks previously have stood out. Hal Robson-Kanu probably being the one for Albion this season. There was a lot of fans who weren't massively sold on him, but then he signed a new deal and all of a sudden he started banging in goals. So he suits the system quite well. But yeah, I think that the big signings, Mateus Pereira, Grady Diangana, and then you look at the likes of Kamil Grzycki they brought in January. What a signing he's been too. So he offers some real threat going forward as well.
With regards to you look at Brentford, you look at Leeds. I'm sure you'll agree, Luke, that the Brentford recruitment model is just outrageous. They seem to churn over player after player, and with a cracking sell-on value. With regards to that, they've obviously got a team unity, but with quality as well. Leeds, I don't know if we have as much quality as maybe a West Brom side, but we're a unit. We're a unit, and I think that's working very well for Leeds. Where do West Brom fit in all that?
West Brom very much kind of fit in a not too dissimilar role to Leeds, I think, because the way that it's very much Bielsa ball at Leeds, isn't it? Where Bielsa kind of brings everything together. I think it's very much the same at West Brom with Slaven Bilic. I mean, Bilic was obviously a bit of a sexy signing over the summer for them in terms of a managerial role. People were kind of questioning where he was going with his managerial career because he went to the Middle East and things didn't work out completely for him there. Obviously, he did really well at West Ham before the season, before he left. And I think it's very much that Slaven Bilic has managed to bring this side together. Obviously, they've made some quality signings themselves, as we mentioned before, with Mateus Pereira, who's really stood out, Brady and Garner, etc. But I think it's very much the way that Slaven Bilic has come in, and in terms of substitutes in games, he knows how to change games. It's very rare that he makes wrong decisions in games like that. He normally brings on players who have a big impact, or he tweaks the system in a way that really works for them. I mean, a standout game would be the game against Blues at St Andrews, where they weren't performing well. Albion, Grady Diangana went off injured, and he changed the system to one we hadn't seen before, and all of a sudden Charlie Austin starts banging in goals and they win that game 3-2. That wouldn't have been the case without Bilic. I don't think it would have been the case under Darren Moore or Jimmy Shan after him, the previous managers that they've had. So yeah, very much it's managerial excellence, maybe mixed slightly with the fact that the Championship isn't as strong as it has been in previous years. I think it's fair to say. It's just the quality. You look at the Premier League and the quality's maybe dropped, especially in lower end. I think in the Championship it hasn't been brilliant this season. You're not going to see a records points total, put it that way, are you?
No, it's been interesting, really, hasn't it? Because I've been, obviously, you sort of compare yourselves with last year. Who's been the best team? What's the promotion race? And as of the other day, I mean, Leeds last season were at sort of a point ahead of our total this season. Obviously, towards our last 4 games, we got 1 point out of 4 games. So it was a shocking end and completely bottled it, as I'm sure everyone loved. But yeah, it's going to be a really interesting running, Luke. And with regards to, obviously, we'll touch on Leeds as well. We're going to touch on each and every team, really. What have your thoughts been on this Leeds United outfit this season? And do you think they've sort of made a level up from last season?
Yeah, I mean, this Leeds team is obviously, they've made some big signings. Having covered Wolves, I thought when they brought in a player like Helder Costa, I thought it was a bit of a risky move, to be honest with you. I know there's a lot of money being spent on him. But in general, Leeds, for me, have always been the team which you kind of fear going to the most, purely because you've got Elland Road, which when fans are allowed in grounds is obviously the most, if not, one of the most, intense atmospheres you can get in the Championship, probably in England. And the quality of the players, Calvin Phillips was obviously linked away, and some of it is stuck around. He's obviously pretty much the best central defensive midfielder in the Championship, and probably if you're in the Premier League, is probably looking at an England call up. I mean, quality elsewhere. Patrick Bamford is very hit and miss in front of goal, but I think he does a very good job. And then you've got players around that. Pablo Hernandez has been fantastic, and you've got a lot of role players around him. And as I said, Bielsa being the boss there obviously has paid massive dividends. I know he's probably on a lot of money there. I'm not too sure of the financial situation for him, but he's obviously a top manager, and the way that Leeds have kind of crafted this team and this kind of style of play, I think maybe the break might have helped you a little bit, just purely because of the amount of intensity that go into the Leeds game. You seem to be pressing teams all the time and creating chances left, right, and centre. It must take a lot out of the players. I think that break may have worked in your benefit a little bit, but obviously, that's not a reason for Leeds being up there. They're obviously a very good outfit. Know how to score goals, know how to create chances, but also seem to know how to shut other teams out. So a fantastic team. Bielsa, obviously, a fantastic manager, and you've got the players to kind of lift you in those moments, as we saw with Hernandez against Swansea.
Yeah, just touching on Bielsa there, Luke, because we sort of absolutely laud him up here. He's just especially if he gets us promoted with all the years of hurt we've had. It'd be incredible. But obviously, you've been a journalist sort of down in the Midlands. What is your what's your take on him? He's come to Leeds and he's not really had a lot of money. He seems to have improved players like Liam Cooper, Ayling, Calvin Phillips, who prior Bielsa coming in, really. I mean, we had a player called Ronaldo Vieira. I'm not sure if you knew about Ronaldo Vieira, but his name was pretty potent. But he was sort of our main youngster coming up in the centre midfield ranks, really. So I mean, just players of that ilk just coming in and improving players. Is that sort of seen around the country when you've been covering other clubs, or is it sort of just a Leeds notion, really?
It's certainly seen, the way that Bielsa's kind of created this team and obviously developed players. I mean, Calvin Phillips wasn't on many people's radars, 2-3 years ago? And now all of a sudden, you had Aston Villa who were trying to chase him in the summer and trying to spend all sorts of money on him. And I think it is a credit to Bielsa, the way that he's kind of crafted these players and really given them license to play and giving them opportunities. Obviously, it doesn't work with everyone. There's some players who might fall through the cracks. But in general, the way that Bielsa's managed the team, I think everyone sees him as the best, probably the best manager in the league, purely because of what he's done with this Leeds team and the Leeds players that he's really developed.
And there seems to be a real sort of mutual respect between Bilic and Bielsa, which is lovely to see, because obviously we've had Leeds have had the gripes of Frank Lampard, as I'm sure you're aware, Dean Smith last year, and it was a lot more controversial, but there seems to be a real mutual respect between Bilic and Bielsa, doesn't there?
Yeah, there definitely is, and I was at that game at Elland Road, and they embraced each other after the game. Obviously, it was a really intense game, which Albion would have thought they probably deserve something from, although
they're very good in the second half, very good.
And obviously there is some mutual respect there, because those two managers, they've been in the game for a long time. Even if they haven't played or worked with each other, extensively previously, they'll know of each other's work, and there's that general kind of professional respect, where there's two teams battling at the top and going back and forth. Obviously, it can go either way. You can either end up with a real rivalry, a la Jose Mourinho, Arsene Wenger, or it can turn into a bit of a bromance, which I think it has done.
Yeah, it's nice to see, because I don't think you see enough of it in football anymore, do you? It's all about rivalry and sort of going at each other a little bit. It was really nice to see I think there was a lot of sort of mutual respect between Baggies fans and Leeds fans after that. But So really strange to sort of get an overall perspective on it, but we touched on it a little bit earlier of post-lockdown West Brom. But what are your thoughts going into the final three, Luke?
I think my thoughts, I'm still fairly confident that Albion can go and push on and do it and seal promotion, because I think a lot of the fan base now are starting to worry that draw with Blackburn. I mean, some of the fans I was speaking to after this, they were like, "Oh, we've bottled it completely. We're going to be in the playoffs." I was like, you do know you're still 3 points clear of Brentford, right? A lot of fans are beginning to worry. I'm still pretty confident they can do it. I think, if they can get, obviously they've got a huge game against Fulham. That's their next game. If they can get a point there, you're guaranteed to be in second spot, regardless how Brentford do in their next game. And then you've only got a couple of games left, to go on and win those. And those aren't the toughest for West Brom, it's fair to say, on paper. Some of the teams they might be playing might not be playing for a whole lot, whereas some, otherwise teams elsewhere might be playing teams who are obviously still playing for something. It's tough to say at this point in the season, isn't it? Someone may well still be battling to save themselves from relegation, so they're going to give everything. Another team in mid-table might, for example, just be like, well, we're kind of on our holidays now. It's not the end of the world, or maybe pull out of the challenge here and there. But yeah, for me, Albion still have enough. They've got the quality. I think the important thing is for them to maintain their mentality. That's where championships are won and lost, promotions lost and gained. If Albion go into a game fearing defeat and saying, let's just not lose this game, you're more likely to go on and lose that. I think you're going to naturally be a bit more careful and drop back more, maybe allow a bit more pressure in hopes that you kind of shutting the opponent out when it might work against you. For me, Albion have to go out. They played well against Blackburn. I think that's a big thing for them. It wasn't a poor performance. They just couldn't stick the ball in the back of the net. just go out there, play the same way as you were. If they get a great result against Fulham, say they beat Fulham, and obviously that gives them a huge lift. And all of a sudden, those last 2 games look like, a lot more winnable games because you've gone and beat Fulham and then basically ended their chances of gaining automatic promotion. Obviously it'll be the playoffs for them if that's the case. It looks like it's going to be the playoffs for them anyway. But it's all about maintaining mentality for me. If Albion can go and get a result against Fulham, then obviously they should, push on from there. Equally, if they get a poor result, that's when you're starting to fear for them a little bit, because that's when, due to the goal difference, Brentford could actually, take that second spot.
It's a really good point you touched on there, Luke. I think even, as a Leeds fan, sort of before the weekend, you're looking at that goal difference. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And we all know as football fans that goal difference essentially acts as an extra point. So is sort of Fulham tonight, you would say, is essentially probably maybe West Brom's biggest game of the season? Yeah,
certainly. I mean, the way things have panned out, it's suddenly turned into that, hasn't it? It's another promotion challenger in the likes of Fulham, who have got a lot of good players. For me, I think Fulham maybe should have done better this season, considering the squad they've got. I don't think having Scott Parker as head coach there has really benefited them. It reminds me a lot of Albion last season under Darren Moore, where it was very much an inexperienced manager with a squad which really should have gained promotion. And he's trying to just kind of figure out his own style of play. I think it's maybe backfired on them a little bit. But yeah, a huge game. They've got a lot of quality. Fulham, obviously Albion do too. But all of a sudden that game is now incredibly interesting. It's one where every fan, I think, for Albion, of an Albion persuasion anyway, will be watching it behind their sofa, because if they concede first, all of a sudden, you're starting to really worry. I think a good start from Albion would be key for them.
Yeah, and I think a lot of opposition fans were looking at Albion last week against Derby, and we were thinking, here we go. Hopefully, Derby, Wayne Rooney, a little bit resurgent, Louis Sibley, Max Bird, some good players in and around there, blend of experience and youth, really, which is, it's the ideal for any football team, really. But and I think a lot of opposition fans, I know Brentford fans, where I've got a couple of Brentford fans as mates, and they were seeing that as a real banana skin potentially for the Baggies. But it was a professional performance, and for me, I don't know about you, Luke, I know they had a couple of players missing, did Derby, but I thought it looked as if West Brom was sort of levels ahead there.
Yeah, and for me, I tweeted after the game saying, but you always know that there's one performance which a team puts in where they just kind of handle it so professionally, and you think that's it, that might be the game that really spurs them on to earn promotion. And I went on the record saying that felt like the game for me where they did that, because Derby, I mean, I know, as you said, they were missing a couple of players, but they still had quality there, and they didn't land a punch on Albion that day. And the Baggies just handled the game perfectly going forward. They were devastating. They didn't need all the ball to do it. Players looked like they were scared in Derby ranks at times. The way that Albion were playing and the way they caught them on the counter a couple of times, and the quality of play. I mean, Pereira really started getting up the gears, and he was almost purring at points, I think, the way that he was playing. And I think a lot of people saw that performance and thought, yeah, this Albion team are going to get through it. And then, of course, the spanner in the works is that Blackburn game where they looked good again, but as I said, just couldn't find a way to score the goals needed. And now all of a sudden, Albion fans have gone from, oh yeah, this team, we're amazing, we look like we're going to do it, to all of a sudden, a little bit of worry, which is always the case with any set of football fans, isn't it? Unless you're 15, 20 points clear, you're always going to be a little bit fearful. And
I think even if we were 20 points clear with 3 games to go, we'd still be the same.
Yeah, you'd be scared of something coming out of the press and maybe a points deduction, right? It's always a way with football fans. I mean, myself being a football fan, anyone who supports any kind of football team will always be a bit wary. Especially teams, who might not be, uber successful sides. Your top 6 in the Premier League, they've never really had to worry about too much, have they? You see teams moaning about drawing a game, whereas us fans of teams who aren't always that successful, we're worried about relegation and missing playoffs and missing top 2 and that kind of stuff. So it's a tough one, isn't it, of being a football fan? But at the end of the day, that's what we all do it for.
That's it. It's the love for the game. With regards to you touched on earlier, Luke, something I want to just analyse a little bit. So West Brom obviously with the key game tonight, which we all know, and then they've got 2 games where, like you said, the teams really haven't got much to play for, and you do see that as once again hugely advantageous when going into the running, really, because obviously West Brom are going to be absolutely firing, you'd hope, and teams sort of who aren't fighting for anything are already on the beach, as they say. So are Baggies fans sort of looking at teams like, obviously Brentford have still got the likes of Preston to play. Preston, are they going to make a late surge? Who knows? But probably quite highly doubtful. But the Baggies looking at teams like Leeds, who've still got, Charlton to play and Barnsley at home, who are still fighting for things. Are they looking at that and thinking, okay, they could still slip up here?
I think they maybe see that and think, more of a hope than an expectation, considering the position in the league that both those teams are. I think the big fear for a lot of Albion fans is Brentford more than Leeds, because they've seen Leeds as a team and who are deserving of going up via the top 2. They've seen themselves as a team deserving of going up by the top 2, and they see Brentford, that bit of a wedding crasher maybe is just trying to sneak in right at the end, and those are that's the team who are really chasing them down. I think in terms of psychology for fans, they see that as whoa, this is me and Leeds' party. What are you doing and getting involved? But no, I think Brentford are the team they're looking out for. I don't think you can really see Leeds slipping up. I think Charlton, obviously, they've started so strongly in the league, but then they've been so hit and miss, and obviously battling down there. And was it Barnsley, the other team you mentioned?
Yeah,
they're obviously fighting for their lives too. But in terms of quality, you'd imagine Leeds have got much more than either of those teams can bring. And I don't think Albion fans are looking at Leeds hoping that they'll slip up. They're looking at Brentford and hoping they'll give us a break at some point. And then looking at their own team, of course, and saying, well, if we just go out and win all our games, then we'll be up. But of course, that's easier said than done, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. This is going to be a horrible scenario for you, Luke, and it could potentially happen with us as well. So I'm not counting my chickens at all. But you're having a lot of people who have been, seen on social media, having chats with friends. If Albion were to get into, drop into that 3rd spot, is it? I mean, you look at Brentford and you think if they go into that 3rd spot, I think you'd probably agree. Well, you might do, but I think that they'd absolutely romp the playoffs, to be quite frank. But if Albion were to go into the playoffs, is it end of the world? Is it the end of the world, or do they still have a ridiculously good chance of going up? Because that 3rd spot normally is sort of a poison chalice, isn't it?
Yeah, it is ordinarily, and it's a tough one because it would be a massive blow for Albion, mentally, if they were to drop into them playoffs and have to go through that rigmarole again. Obviously, we saw what happened to them in the playoffs last year. 2 legs against Aston Villa and then lost that on penalties, and then obviously Villa went on and won in the final. But yeah, it would be a very tough one for Albion. I think they'd look at themselves and they'd say, look, we've got more quality than any of these sides. I think the big one would be, their result against Fulham this evening, because if, say, they were to lose that game, end up dropping into 3rd spot, and then have to face Fulham, say, in a playoff final scenario, Fulham would be massively buoyed by that, knowing that they'd had Albion's number before. I mean, Albion didn't beat them at Craven Cottage either. So, I mean, there's a little bit of a feather to their cap there. And that has the same thing kind of happened last year in the playoff final with Villa and Derby, because obviously Villa got, great results against Derby through the regular season, and then it got to the playoff final. And Villa's players were visible. I mean, they came on record saying when they saw that Leeds lost to Derby in that playoff semi-final, they were joyous because they'd known they'd beaten them 4-0 at Villa Park and 3-0 at Pride Park, and they thought, well, this is great. We get to go to Wembley and play a team we've beaten twice this season. So for Fulham, that would be a massive boost for them. And Albion, obviously, you have to deal with the fact that you've been in the top 2 for basically all of the season, and then ended up, in the playoffs. So it would be a nightmare scenario for the fan base. I'm sure Slaven Bilic would try and get the most positivity out of it that he could. And he does have a lot of quality in that side. But as I said, it would be a huge blow to suffer for either of Leeds or Albion. And funnily, you mentioned that Brentford, if they were, favourites for the playoffs. For me, I don't know. If Brentford made the playoffs, I think they've put in so much effort, forcing their way to try and battle into these top 2. And if they were to, to struggle and to do that, they'd probably think, well, geez, we've got to go through the playoffs now. I think it wouldn't surprise me if a team surprised them,
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, because you think, I mean, Thomas Frank, I mean, Leeds fans have some certain views on Thomas Frank. I think he loves a mind game here and there. So, yeah, that's always very interesting on social media. But he, came out and said, obviously, automatics were completely gone, pre-lockdown, which, 11 points off, you would think that. But it is, I mean, going into the playoffs, I mean, then you'd be expecting, if they did win sort of 9-10 games, to then be expected to win sort of 11-12 games, which is an enormous feat. And do you think it is maybe some mind games by Thomas Frank? Do you think they think that they can get into the automatic spots with 3 games to go?
Oh, they'll certainly see themselves being able to do that. I mean, if you're a football player and it's still mathematically, possible, and the chances are that there's still a couple twists and turns maybe left in this season before the playoffs. I mean, why wouldn't you think that is possible? I mean, if you don't think it's possible, it's likely you're not going to be able to give your full all, I don't think. And it is 100% mind games. Managers are well aware of the things that they can say and do in the press to make teams think other things and maybe get under someone's skin. It's 100% still doable for them. Maybe he didn't believe it when he was. Maybe he did believe that when he was saying it. What are the chances of Albion and Leeds slipping up enough for us to be able to catch them and us also going on this fantastic run? He probably did think that it was a very pretty much mission impossible for them at the point when he said that, saying that the top 2 are really out of reach. But now he'll certainly have changed that mindset, whether he keeps that to himself or not. If you were to ask him the same question, I'm sure he would say, look, Albion and Leeds still got to slip up. He'd try and be as respectful as he could. But in the same way, he'll be telling his team 100% go at it, because, no one wants to go through a playoff scenario when you can go and get yourself up, automatically. And
it was, we're just talking earlier about you sort of disarming Derby, really, which I think is sort of the perfect word, taking away completely all of their artillery, really, to go at you last week. When Fulham played Cardiff, I mean, we know all about Cardiff this year. You've taken 4 points off us somehow, but they have. Fair play to Cardiff. But Fulham sort of did the same thing to Cardiff. Cardiff, they had a couple of chances, sort of eyeing them out a little bit. But aside from that, I thought Fulham were completely dominant. Played football, which is what Fulham do. We saw that in the first half against Leeds United when they were by far the better team. Cue Pablo Hernandez in the second half. But it's a huge game for West Brom tonight. And what are you sort of looking at with Fulham? Do you think obviously the return of Alexander Mitrovic is going to sort of buoy the Fulham team, or do you think obviously they went 3 games on the bounce, winning without Mitrovic? What are your thoughts on that, Luke?
I think for Fulham, it's a great mixture of things, isn't it? Because you've got Mitrovic, who is, I think, what many people would say is probably the most potent striker in the Championship, and someone who has obviously got Premier League quality. His discipline's questionable, but in terms of his actual ability to stick the ball in the net, he's probably the best in the league at that. Alongside this good form that they've discovered, I think Albion will look at the game and say, look, we need to keep, maybe them front 3 quiet. I mean, the likes of Ivan Cavallero, obviously, quality. Anthony Knockaert, obviously quality. They need to keep them forward-thinking players as quiet as they can. And Albion have tended to do a decent job of that. I mean, defensively, they've managed themselves quite well. I mean, there was a game against Hull after the restart where they didn't look brilliant. But, I mean, with the likes of Shemi Ajayi and the other players that they've got at the back, I mean, it'll probably be Carl Bartley alongside him. They'll look to keep Fulham quiet. But a good way of doing it, I'd imagine, would be to do the same thing that they did to Derby, where they allow them to have the ball, set traps for them, win the ball in high positions. So it essentially starves the forward-thinking players of too much time on the ball in good positions, and then look to counter them, hit them quickly using the pace of Diangana and Grzycki, and then hope that they find a way of scoring a bit more if they create the same chances they did against Blackburn.
Is that where? I mean, I think, when we had our first spell down at the Hawthorns, when we went down there and it was, I believe it was Darren Moore, I believe it was, and it was Harvey Barnes on the pitch, and he was just absolutely terrifying, and we just couldn't deal with him. The West Brom stuck 4 past us that day. Is that sort of always been West Brom's sort of mantra these last couple of years? Just having those frightening players on the counter attack and just sort of sitting deep, defending well, trying to solidify that sort of back six really, and then just hitting teams on the counter attack with just raw pace. Has that been a thing throughout the season?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, under Darren Moore, it was very much a mantra of we'll score more than you. Defensively, they weren't brilliant. They tinkered with like a defensive system which wasn't brilliant. They were playing out of the back from a lot of the time and were kind of struggling to do that. And the fans got on them for that. They were very fearful of the way that the team were playing. But going forward, as you said, they were fantastic. They had Harvey Barnes first part of the season. Who knows where they would have been, had he hung around after being recalled by Leicester, of course. They had the likes of Dwight Gale, who was obviously a great championship striker. They had Jay Rodriguez. They had a lot of good players last season. But it was very much, as I said, a mantra of we'll score more than you. This season is certainly been developed. It's evolved a bit. It's definitely still kind of the mantra of trying to score goals and play nice football. They don't have the same kind of searing pace right up front that they did have last season. Obviously, they've got the likes of Grzycki now, who is absolutely rapid. They've got Dingon, who's very quick. Pereira's quick with the ball at his feet, but I wouldn't say he's got searing speed. And then up front, I mean, they haven't got a lot of pace. They've got Hal Robson-Kanu, they've got Charlie Austin, they've got Kenneth Zahor, none of whom are the quickest or most mobile. They tend to favour Robson-Kanu, where he can kind of hold the ball up and link play with the other players. Matt Phillips offers a bit of pace, as does Callum Robinson, but there's not the same kind of fear factor, I think, as when you saw like Harvey Barnes, for example. But it's very much of the goals being kind of created, really nice, like crafted moves. Sometimes maybe trying to walk the ball into the net, which works to their detriment a couple of times. Sometimes the fans are hopeful of just take a punt, just see what the keeper's got. And Callum Robinson's offered a lot of that, to be fair to him, since coming in from Sheffield United. But it seems to have evolved a little bit. They're more defensively sound this season than they were last. But equally, going forward, they definitely seem more cultured, although maybe lacking a little bit of that pace, especially in that central striking position.
And we were just talking earlier, Luke, about Fulham not being sort of running away with it. I mean, it's just come to mind that you're talking about players there who, I mean, how many strikers is that? Sort of 3, 4 of potentially not the, you're just talking not the most impactful players, but still they've proved it at this level. Should Albion be sort of running away with it right now with that sort of quality of squad?
I mean, with the quality they have, you on paper, you'd say that they have one of, if not the strongest squads in the league. They've got a manager who obviously knows what he's doing, although he hasn't really managed in this league before. So yeah, you could make that argument quite easily. The players they've got. I mean, even in midfield, you look at like Romain Sawyers, you look at Jake Livermore. Filip Krovinovic has been really good second half of the season. It took him a while to settle, but they've got so much quality in there. Jake Livermore, people forget when Albion were in the Premier League, he was getting England call-ups, and obviously Romain Sawyers at Brentford knows what he's doing. He knows the league incredibly well. He knows Albion well because obviously that's where he was, coached as a youngster before departing. So yeah, they've got a lot of championship quality players in there, players who really should be bossing the league. It's very much just trying to fit them pieces together, because we've seen that teams can always spend a lot of money or bring in players who have Premier League quality or championship quality, and if the system isn't right and if the management isn't right, then it can backfire against them. I mean, you only need to look at the likes of Villa when they came down to the Championship. They spent a lot of money. They brought in the likes of Ross McCormack, who everyone thought was a safe bet when they spent that kind of money on him, the amount of goals he scores, and it just failed completely for them. So I think it's important to kind of get a decent mixture of players who not only offer quality but also fit in well. The fact that the team mentality needs to be right. There are so many other things than just sheer quality, because you can throw a load of brilliant players together, but if they don't like one another, if they don't know what each other is going to be doing on the pitch, then it's not going to work for them all the time, is it?
Yeah, it's sort of throwing mud against the wall and hoping it sticks, really, isn't it? With regards to the post-lockdown sort of running as well, with Brentford just on an absolute assault at the minute, do you think that would be, I mean, it's hard to say because obviously you'd be working on hindsight here, but do you think that sort of would be motivating the Baggies players, or do you think they'd sort of feel the heat right now?
I think it'll be a bit of both, to be honest with you. I think the players will be, they wouldn't say it in public, but the first result they'll be looking at, other than their own this season, will be Brentford now. But that heat will probably spur them on a little bit. They'll certainly feel that. They'll feel that pressure, and then they'll say, right, that's it. If Brentford aren't going to stop, we can't stop. We've got to keep going. The likes of Jake Livermore, who's obviously, he's a skipper at Albion. He's such a good organizer. He won't let players really, slip up. He's willing to dig players out if they're not tracking back or not, putting in the work that they need to be doing. So I think for him and for this Albion squad who have been up there for so long, they will feel that pressure, but I think it will work, in their favour in terms of spurring them on, because they're in the position to lose this. At the moment, that second promotion spot is theirs to lose, and they won't want to be the team that does that.
And we're just talking about we've talked about individual players before for West Brom. Have there been any specific players that have sort of impressed you for Leeds United? We talk about obviously Calvin Phillips a lot, but we've got a lone player in from Brighton who I'm sure you're aware of, Ben White, centre-back, who he's probably the best centre-back, in my opinion, I've seen at Ellen Road. Incredible. I don't know what your thoughts are and maybe if you've seen sort of an improvement in certain areas from last year from Leeds United.
Yeah, I think at centre-back, I think you certainly improved. Janssen was a player who always offered, a lot of emotion, a lot of heart. But I don't know about you. You guys will obviously know more about this than I will, but it never seemed to quite click. I feel like, you saw when you had that game against Villa, and I know I've brought Villa up a couple of times, but that game against Villa where, Bielsa essentially told Leeds to concede a goal, and Janssen obviously kind of went against that. I don't think that's something for Bielsa that he really wants from any of his players. He very much seems like, I'm the manager. If I tell you to do something, you do it. Not so much as a taskmaster, but you won't want a player really going against him. I think Janssen was the type where he is. He's a very good centre back, but I feel like you have improved there. For me, a player that always stands out for Leeds has been Pablo Hernandez. I think when he comes onto a pitch, he can change games. He offers, a great set piece delivery. He offers great just delivery in general. On the ball, he's a player to be scared of, and obviously knows how to score a goal. He's just a very, a shining talent for that Leeds team. And I know he's had injury problems this season. I do wonder where, how far ahead Leeds would be had he been fit all season long. And obviously we've touched on Calvin Phillips. And then you've got players like Matthias Klick as well, who just offers a little bit, is someone who can, if he's not starting a game, can come off the bench and just change a game. There's players around that Leeds team who can have a massive impact as well. And I think that's so important because, you can always have players who, are your shining talents and, the players you rely on week in, week out. But when they don't perform, you need others to kind of step in. And he seems like a player who does that.
Yeah, completely agree. And with regards to, I just want to touch on one player there, obviously been a sort of Midlands correspondent there, Luke. You mentioned him earlier as well. Helder Costa, he split a lot of opinions. I think ability-wise, you don't get into the Portuguese national setup, Benfica, starting lineup. You don't start for Wolves in the Premier League if you haven't got talent. And you can see that. You can really see that. He doesn't really go at fullbacks as much as we'd like. He's sort of, obviously this Bielsa mold's changed how he plays, and I think that's why we're hoping next season we'll see the full Helder Costa in at full effect. But the Premier League, it didn't massively work for him at Wolves. Can you sort of give us obviously an insight on what you're expecting to see from Helder Costa and if he can hit that next sort of level with Leeds United?
Yeah, for Helder Costa, it's been a strange one because he was one of the first players brought in under or one of the big players brought in under the new management, the new ownership over there. And he really did, stand out as a player who was, probably the player to lead Wolves forward. And then he was brought in, and I think Paul Lambert had a chance to manage him. And then under Nuno, where Wolves have really took off, he was shining. And then he picked up a really troublesome ankle injury, and after that, for me, he never seemed the same player. He was a player who would run at defenders, he would cause all sorts of problems, and then after post-injury, he never seemed to kind of rediscover that form, and he fell out of the pecking order. He fell down that pecking order. The likes of Ion Caballero and other players, Diogo Jota, for example, really started to outshine him, and I was very surprised that Wolves got the money they did for him. To be honest with you, from Leeds. I know Leeds are a team challenging for promotion, and they, you want to spend the money, big money. and they would have seen Helder Costa and maybe his stats from the season before, saying, "Oh yeah, like when he was fit, and if we can get him fit and firing again." But he's never seen the same player to me. So I was surprised. But if Bielsa can work his magic and get more out of him and get him back to the level that he was, then you've got a genuine Premier League quality player there. I think that's what a lot of fans will want from him. The money that you've spent on him, it's upwards of around 15 million or so, is it?
Yeah.
For that kind of money, you want someone who's going to provide goals and create chances for you. And he has been hit and miss for Leeds, but he's very much confidence and getting over that injury. Still, it was a really troublesome injury for him, and it definitely worked against him. I think for Leeds, if you can drill that out of him, and as we've seen with Bielsa, develop him, because he's still not the oldest player in the world. He's not the youngest either, but he's not someone who can't be developed. If you can build on that and maybe offer him a bit of confidence and say, look, you're going to be starting in this position, or this is going to be your role. I really want you to embrace that. Then things could still work out for him. But ever since that injury, for me, he's not seen quite the same player.
Yeah, and we've seen that a lot. We've seen that a lot with a lot of Wolves fans. The permanent transfer went up on social media, and you saw some positive things, but you also saw some really interesting, sort of not negative things, but sort of thank you, Helder, for everything you've done. But what a steal from Wolverhampton Wanderers to get that amount of money out of Leeds. And I'm sort of getting the vibe, Luke, that you're sort of on that sort of trajectory, really. Unless, I guess my sort of, not counterpoint as such, but my sort of opinion on that would be: is there a better manager to harness that ability than Bielsa?
Well, certainly. That's the big thing. If he's got the trust from the manager and the manager can develop him. You've seen it with, I'm not comparing, Marcelo Bielsa to Pep Guardiola, but when you see like a manager who comes in and does develop players, you only need to look at some of the players that have gone to places and it hasn't worked out, whereas they stood out previously. Bielsa would be the man to do that, you'd imagine. He seems like a player who, really devotes himself to developing players. And if he can develop Helder Costa into the player that he was, or even improve him, from that, then you've got a real player on your hands and a real talent, and someone who should, perform for you in either the Championship or the Premier League. I imagine it will be the Premier League now, considering the position that you're in. But yeah, he's definitely a player who offers something. Hopefully Bielsa can get the best out of him.
Yeah, and Tommy Firth here. Let's be fair to Costa. He started to come into really good form. Man of the match versus Stoke, and then done really well in our goal versus Swansea. He's always sort of a semi-assist, Costa.
Yeah.
He's always sort of looking for the overlap of like Luke Ayling, and he's always sort of, so I think I completely agree with you, Luke, and it's really interesting how you mentioned there he stopped going at players, because that is probably my biggest criticism of Helder Costa. It's the fact when he's going one-on-one against a left-back, I would be absolutely terrified. His pace, his skill, his balance, his coordination, you just, be fearful. But sometimes it is the cutback. And you wonder if there's got to be a bit of a confidence element there, hasn't there?
Yeah, definitely. He does seem very much like a confidence player, and he was like that before in the injury as well in terms of his confidence. But I think if you look back, there was a goal he scored for Wolves. I think it was against Cardiff in the Championship. He runs at his fullback, and the fullback is terrified of him because he knows the quality that he has, and he ends up basically walking the ball into the net. And he does a couple dummies where the defender doesn't know which way he's going to go, and just the sheer pace and precision of which he's running at the defender just terrifies the defender to the point where he doesn't really know what to do. And I've not seen that from Helder Costa since his injury. I think it is a confidence thing. I think it might be a mentality thing. I can't remember whether how he picked up the injury. It may well have been running at a defender, and then he maybe beats him for speed and gets caught, and then that's when he picks up the injury. I'm not entirely sure, to be completely honest with you. But if that is the case, then you can see why it would affect his psychology, running at players, because whether you do it consciously or subconsciously, you're not going to want to hurt yourself the same way that he did. He was out for months and months with that problem. And I think it is a confidence issue for him. If he can rebuild that and really, if he is in good form, then obviously build on that and begin to believe in himself again, because it does seem like a belief thing to me at times, then he can be that player again. He's as I said, he's not the oldest player in the world. His athletical abilities won't be, leaving him just yet. So yeah, for me, just build that confidence and you might have a player on your hands there.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, when we're talking about absolute players at this level, and I think this is probably what we wanted Helder Costa to be this year, sort of this comparative. But you've got Ben Rama at Brentford, you've got Pereira at obviously at the Baggies. How good are they, and how far do you see them going?
Well, I'll start with Pereira just because I've seen him a little bit more. The fact that they're getting him for less than 10 million quid is an absolute steal. I don't know how they've managed to tinker this deal. I know there were reports of when he was in Portugal that his attitude might have been a slight issue, but he's not shown any of that at Albion this season. I think it might be the fact that he's actually playing and starting games. I don't know how he reacts to being left out of squads, but even in Germany, he was at Nuremberg, I think. And stood out there, admittedly in a team that went down from the Bundesliga, but won awards for his quality. And back in Portugal, things just didn't work out for him. Albion came in with a loan deal, and it was very much of what are we getting here? Because as you said, you can see players come in with really big names or flashy looking players who aren't really equipped for the Championship because it's a league like no other, isn't it? You're playing games left, right, and centre. 1 minute you're playing against a team who's happy to let you have the ball and maybe sitting back, and then you've got another who's willing to throw in challenges left, right, and centre. But he's really stood up to that, and he's begun to shine. And I think he's a Premier League player in waiting. If by some disaster Albion didn't end up getting promoted this season, or things didn't work out for them, I think he's definitely a player who's got Premier League quality. It wouldn't surprise me to see a team in the top flight make a move for him if that was the case. But yeah, his left foot, when he's on that right hand side, he cuts in onto that left foot and it can cause all sorts of problems. Equally, when he's playing in his best position for me, which is at the number 10, he just gives defenders fits because he's got quality from distance. He can score really good goals. He can create. Some of the passes he's made this season are absolutely absurd. There was a goal. I think it was against Derby. It may well have been against Hull. I can't quite remember. This reverse pass he does takes about 4 or 5 defenders out of the game completely. And Grzycki, all he needs to do is just basically tap the ball in. Absolutely superb quality. And for me, a Premier League player in waiting. Whereas Ben Rama, for me, has been a Premier League player playing in the wrong league for the past season and a half or whatever it has been, because he's a player who, for Brentford, I mean, you only need to look at that team and see when Benrahma's on, he's the player who really does make them tick, especially going forward. I mean, the way he creates goals, the way he scores goals. I know he was linked with Premier League teams over the summer. If Brentford don't go up, I can't imagine him hanging around at Griffin Park any much longer. There'll be so many teams after him. I know I've heard that Chelsea are in for him, but it would surprise me if they go for him. But I can certainly see a team, mid-table, maybe slightly lower down than that, taking a chance on him. And I think he'd pay dividends because he's got so much quality on the ball. He's pacey, he's quick. He seems like a pretty down-to-earth player as well. In general, I think he's a player who teams really need to be scared of. If I had to pick the best player in the Championship, it would be Said Benrahma. After that, it'd be a bit of a toss-up for me between Pereira and someone like Pablo Hernandez.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with the £60 million been bandied around for a player. He's only young, and I do completely agree. I think you take Pereira out of that West Brom side, they're in deep trouble. I think you take Pablo Hernandez out of this Leeds United side completely, they're in big trouble for me. That creative spark, and I think you bang on the money with Benrahma. Interesting comment from Paul Harrison here. I mean, we've already spoken about Albion potentially in the playoffs. Given they'd probably have to face a Fulham side who've just beaten them, would confidence drop? But I guess sort of an extension of that, obviously, because we've already touched on that a little bit. Who would sort of be the nightmare sort of tie, do you think, for West Brom, let's say, potentially in the final, stylistically?
In terms of style, Albion really do tend to struggle against teams who kind of sit back and make things just turgid and really hard to play against. We saw it against and it's hard to say that because they're not going to be facing these kinds of teams in the playoffs. You wouldn't think, but teams like Blues, where they set up and they had like 11 men behind the ball, and it's very much like we're going to sit here in 2 low blocks. If you can break through us, then you can break through us, but if not, we'll happily sit here and earn a point. And then in the playoffs, it obviously turns into a different matter, because then it's like, well, okay, we'll take you to penalties and we'll see, things level out completely there, don't they? I mean, you can be as good as you are at, finishing chances in open play, but if you can't sit the ball in from the penalty spot, and obviously Albion will have a couple of nightmares of last season regarding that, then, all of a sudden it works against them. For me, though, I mean, if you're having a nightmare scenario, I think Fulham in that final would be the team you'd least want to play, especially if they're in the form that they are, and say they were to beat Albion. As I said, it would give them such a boost, and it would equally, work against Albion a lot. I mean, Albion will probably try and play it as like, let's get one over on this team who have beat us at, in the league and drawn at home with us. Let's finally get a result over these guys. But in terms of confidence, I think that would work completely in Fulham's favour. I think Albion would be so deflated as well from missing out on them top two. It'd be really hard for them to recover from that. It wouldn't surprise me if they did recover from it, but it would be a tough task. And
with regards to actually promotion, then Luke, we'll tear off close to here. But how do you see it going? Who do you see winning it? And obviously, sort of, who do you see getting in that last spot, really?
For me, I think Leeds are going to probably go and claim that title now. I think that result over Swansea it says a lot more than I think a lot of people will see it as. A lot of people see the result and say, "Oh yeah, 3 more points." That's a big 3 points. That is. It's against a team who, I believe, Leeds have maybe struggled against Swansea previously, or Swansea have put in some.
I think it's been about 64 years we've not won down there, Luke. So,
it's a team that have always given Leeds problems, and the manner in which they won that game, late on, it gives you such a lift. I mean, they would have seen Albion's result and said, "Look, Albion have slipped up now," and I think it is that Leeds is title to lose. In general, I don't think the title and second place matter a whole lot. If you get promotion, you get promotion automatically. And you only need to see last season and see that Norwich went up as title winners and have gone down, as basically Premier League, just sticking down in the bottom there. They've been at the foot of the table for a long old time. So it doesn't really matter to you. I mean, obviously there's other factors there, and the amounts of money that you spend in the summer, this and that. But it doesn't really matter where you finish in the Championship. Yeah, you get a trophy for it, but you also get a trophy for winning the playoffs. I mean, no one really cares about the trophy. They care about getting into the Premier League, don't they? Second place, I'm still sticking with Albion purely because they've got that advantage that they've got now. I think if they put in a really good performance and win tonight, I think they really are in the driving seat. And then for me, I think Brentford will scrape through the playoffs if there is finish there. But it wouldn't surprise me if a team like Fulham goes and does it. It really wouldn't, just because that Brentford team have put in so much getting into the position they're in. You said the fans will be gutted if they put in this run together and still don't make the top two. I think it'll affect the players just the same way. They may well stick themselves up for the playoffs and say, look, we've only got 3 more games left. Let's just go out and win all them. But as you said, the Championship and the playoffs in general can do weird things. You only need to look back at last season, and I think a lot of people expected Leeds after their first leg to go on and make the final. I think you looked at Albion versus Villa. Albion went 1-0 up at Villa Park in their first leg, and then it all kind of fell apart with a red card for Dwight Gale and other players missing out. And anything can happen in a playoff scenario, and you wouldn't want to be in that lottery again. And for Brentford, it would they wouldn't want to be involved in that. But you never know, do you? That playoff can always be a bit of a lottery. But I'd stick my money on Brentford purely because the form they're going into it with, should they carry on winning. But again, it wouldn't surprise me if another team manages to nip them to the playoff final win.
I mean, it's interesting. You're always talking about that 10-game winning run potentially Brentford might get. Let's get that out there. Potentially, it's still a big task. So Nathan Brown said, if Fulham beat West Brom, could they sneak into second? I mean, I would probably say no, but the reason I mentioned that Brentford winning streak was because, I guess if Fulham win tonight, that's 5 on the bounce. I think they've still got a little bit of a tricky run in. So I would say no. And obviously with your answer there, Luke, I know you would probably say no as well. But I mean, looking into the future, that's what we do as football fans. We don't stay in the present. Dylan Turner asks on Twitter, if West Brom weren't to go up, do you think they'd lose out on a whole host of players? And the same question for Brentford.
They certainly would miss out on the opportunity of maybe signing some players. I mean, if Albion were to go up, they'd probably be looking, at the Championship, misses out, so to speak. So say Brentford weren't to go up, Albion would probably look at signing someone like an Ollie Watkins. I think he's the type of player that they would really need. They'd certainly need to spend more money than that. There's work needed to be done around the squad, but Albion do have a 2-year plan in place. That was always the idea with Slaven Bilic. So if they didn't get promotion this season, they've still got parachute payments and this and that, and they would push for it again next year. But they would certainly miss out on the opportunity of signing some, players that have been linked with. I mean, they had been linked with a move for Joe Hart. That would surprise me a little bit because they've got Sam Johnstone in goal. You'd be spending a lot of money on wages for someone like Joe Hart, who wouldn't necessarily be, a massive improvement, which is kind of crazy to say considering where Joe Hart's been through his career. But it's a state of play now in his career, I think. For me, he's a player who's going to be linked with pretty much any lower league, Premier League team now. And similarly with Brentford, I mean, Brentford's recruitment model is something else entirely. I mean, we touched on it previously. I mean, it's fantastic work that they do. You only need to look at, the outlays that they make and then the profits that they make from them players to see how well they do. It would be interesting to see how they would cope in the Premier League. Obviously, they've got a new ground and they've got a system which seems to work for them. But in the Premier League, I think it'd be a tough ask for some of them players. I mean, as you said, they've got some real quality in there, and Ethan Pinnock is a player that you highlighted. I mean, and elsewhere in that squad, they've got some good players. I'm not too sure whether they're Premier League quality at some points. I mean, they've certainly got players who are, but then there's questions over other ones. But mind you, a lot of people said that about Sheffield United, and they've really stood out in the Premier League this season. So it would be interesting for them because when teams go up, they often try and break the bank, and for some teams it works, some teams it doesn't. Wolves were probably one of the last successes from promotion after Sheffield United, and they spent the majority of their money on loans with views, and the players that they brought in when they were in the Championship have really stepped up in the Premier League, and then they've added quality to that in the likes of Raul Jimenez and players like that. So it'd be interesting to see how Brentford kind of handled that. Whereas for Albion, they wouldn't be looking to break the bank completely. They wouldn't be doing a Fulham or an Aston Villa and spending silly amounts of money, but they would need to spend some. They'd be hoping that their recruitment method from this season probably moves on to next as well, where they bring in players who might not be as expensive, but certainly step up to the level.
And once again, jumping ahead, but we've got to do, Luke. Premier League. Obviously, one of the three or two of the three are going to go up, maybe even three of the three. How do you facilitate the Premier League? How do you make roads in the Premier League? We've seen it with Sheffield United. I think Sheffield United are a little bit of an outlier. Still a lot of players from League One, which is crazy. All bought on sort of small pittance, really. And then you sort of see teams going up, panicking, buying. I think you look at Villa, Fulham of previous seasons. How do you get it perfect? How do you get that middle ground, and how do you sort of stay in the Premier League via recruitment and all the bits surrounding that?
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because a lot of managers, a lot of CEOs, a lot of sporting directors would love to know the answer to that question because it would make them a lot of money, wouldn't it? It's a tough one for me, but I think you've seen with the likes of Wolves, you've seen the likes of Sheffield United, where if you stick with a system, stick with a style of play, and maybe just sprinkle little bits of talent here and there, that tends to be the way to go. I mean, you mentioned like Sheffield United with players from League One. You look at that Wolves side. They've got Conor Cody, who was basically a central defensive midfielder until Nuno kind of masterminded his move to centre back. They had Willy Bolly in the Championship. Matt Doherty, was bought for a pittance from Ireland, and obviously as he was there before Nuno was there, and he's really stood out. And then they've added players, haven't they? They've added the likes of Raul Jimenez, who's quickly shone as a Premier League talent. They've added Adama Traore. We all know the threat that he can bring, and then the likes of Ruben Neves, who was essentially a Champions League player when he made the move to Wolves in the Championship, which I think was a big shock for a lot of people. And Diogo Jota, who's obviously a player who had plenty of talent, and they had Helder Costa, they had Ivan Caballero, who have stood out as Championship quality players. But they stuck with the system. They had a 3-4-3, and whereas Sheffield United had three at the back with the overlapping centre backs, and they had managers who would kind of put them in place and stuck with them. Fulham were a little bit different, weren't they? Because they essentially, they had a promotion team who were hanging around. They weren't the oldest in the world, but then they tried to spend a lot of money on improving on that, and a lot of the players who kind of got them to promotion were then kind of left out in the cold a little bit, like the likes of Stefan Johansson, for example, who ended up going out on loan to Albion and then is now back at Fulham and now playing again. Whereas Villa, it was a bit different. They had a very aging squad. I don't think they expected to go up when they did. Obviously, they've done a bit of a Brentford. They did a bit of a Brentford, didn't they, going on that massive 10-game winning run and then cruising through the playoffs. But they had a lot of players in who they couldn't bring back. The likes of Glenn Will and Mila Jedinak were very old. They had Axel Tuanzebe at centre back alongside Tyrone Mings, who was on loan. Tuanzebe they couldn't bring in from Manchester United. They had Tammy Abraham up front. He was a big loss for them in the Premier League because they just didn't have a striker of that kind of quality. So yeah, I mean you can look at the different systems of recruitment when teams go up. Is it the right thing to do? Is it the wrong thing to do? I think you have to kind of find that mixture, which is a tough one to find, but try and stick with the system. Put some belief in the players who you think might be able to make the step up, and then sprinkle little bits of quality here and there, because we've seen that with Sheffield United as well. The likes of Lisa Mousset and Phil Jagielka, who offer experience, really do help that side. And I think that's the important factor for teams when you're recruiting players. A little bit of talent here and there, but make sure you stick with the same system and rely on the players who have got you up, because although some might not offer the quality of the Premier League, they're certainly going to give you 100% week in, week out, aren't they?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Brent's also asked, if Leeds are to be promoted to the Premier League, do you think it's imperative that Bielsa is involved with transfer targets? Players that have to come in seem to have a mountain to climb to gain his approval. And you sort of saw that a little bit. I know we just touched on Sheffield United there, but you saw that a little bit with the likes of Ollie McBurney. He's sort of coming to the fore really now, but at the start he wasn't really involved. And do you think that's a massive sign of sort of the way forward there, Luke? Just actually having your managers fully involved with it and not putting all the responsibility on your sporting directors, as sort of you think Norwich have done with like the likes of Stuart Webber.
Yeah, it's vitally important for me. I mean, you look at teams, and Villa is another prime example where Dean Smith is essentially head coach. He has to give the green light on signings, but he would have given a list of players like, I really want him, for example, and they'll say, well, we can't afford him, so we'll get you a player kind of like him, and then things that might not necessarily work out. I think it's important for someone like Leeds, if they are to go up, to the Bielsa is the man, who if it's not his sole decision, he certainly needs to be working very closely with the sporting director and working on recruitment, because like as Brent puts, they have a mountain to climb to gain his approval, and it's exactly the same at Wolves with Nuno. Nuno is an integral part of the recruitment strategy there. Everything kind of runs around him at Wolves. And, players who have come in haven't always made the grade. You look at, Patrick Catrone, for example, they spent upwards of £20 million on him as a striker, and it just did not work out because Nuno would have done his due diligence on him, probably thought he was up for the task, and then he's got him. And, another player was Vallejo at centre-back. I mean, he came in from Real Madrid, and he was in on loan with a view, and those deals have worked so well for Wolves previously. And I tell you what, he looked like a deer in headlights in the Premier League, and I don't think anyone kind of predicted that. So it's vital that Bielsa is given an opportunity to have a real say on transfers, because if not, it not only can it cause problems on the pitch, it can cause problems off of it. There's a little bit of a rift that can create between CEOs, sporting directors, and managers. If a manager feels like he's not getting the players that he's asking for, his head could quickly be turned. If that team perform enough to where another team are interested. You can quickly look at elsewhere. Can I get a job here? Could I get a job at maybe a more safe Premier League team? Whereas you've seen like the likes of Nuno at Wolves, where Arsenal were linked with him, but because everything goes around him at Wolves and he gets to organise this and that, he's quite happy there, and obviously he's getting paid enough. So it's important for Leeds to kind of follow the same kind of route that Wolves have gone down, and I think Leeds do kind of fit that mould in that respect. You've got a manager who has been around and certainly very got lots of quality. He's got lots of quality players, Just keep him happy, and I'm pretty sure that Leeds could be safe next season. They're probably the team out of any in the Championship, which I think could be the most safe the next season should they go up.
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? It's a weird one, Luke. Why we think that? Because I can't see him making wholesale changes next year. I just don't think it's his way. He's so loyal. You've seen that with Patrick Bamford this year when we've had Eddie Nketiah come in. Near on Arsenal's starting striker now, obviously alongside Lacazette, but we've had Eddie Nketiah come in. Would not start him. It's not his. It's not the same philosophy. He wants him to get to his level, and then he'll start. And we've seen it with John Kevin Augustin, who's came in from Leipzig. That has not worked at all. So Bielsa's gone out, picked him. He's come in, and he's just not adapted. So Bielsa will not have him. He won't throw him in. And do you think that is vitally important, having sort of a manager who you've seen it with Bilic as well. You've seen it with Thomas Frank. They're strong-willed managers. Do you think that is absolutely vitally important, and maybe why we've got three really positive foreign managers with positive philosophies at the top of the table?
Definitely, and I think it works in so many other respects as well, because they'll believe in themselves so much. They believe in their systems. They won't let press talk and fan talk on social media really kind of twist their system at all. They believe in their system, even if things aren't necessarily working the way they want them to. I mean, you only need to look at Leeds and Patrick Bamford and realise that he doesn't always score goals. He misses a fair few chances, but Bielsa understands the work that he does outside of scoring goals and how important he is to the system, the way he presses from the front, the way he links up play. I think it's important that you have a manager who kind of sticks to their laurels in that respect, because when managers begin changing things and start swapping out players left, right and centre, that's when you start to really question them, I think. And you'll never see that, I don't think, with the likes of Slaven Bilic and with Marcelo Bielsa. They just don't do that. They say, this is our system. If you don't like it, then you deal with it. You know what I mean? Like, if you're a player who doesn't suit my system, then I'm afraid it's not going to work for you. And they're not bad about it in any respect. I mean, they're not going to mistreat players over that. They're just going to say to them that they seem like two very honest blokes in the fact that if a player doesn't suit the system, they'll bring them into the office. They'll say, "Look, I'm really sorry. You just don't fit my system the way I want you to." And I think that's important, across the club as well. They'll stand their own, and they'll stand up for themselves when the CEO or the owner or someone comes and questions something. They'll say, "Look, this is the way I'm running things, whether you like it or not. If it's getting results, I'm sticking with it." And it's important that managers are like that, because as you said, things can go south pretty quickly. So for me, Bielsa, Bilic, two very good managers, and both of them I think can cut it in the Premier League next season.
Yeah, and it's interesting you just mentioned. Obviously, we'll near on finish on this, Luke. We've had some great questions in. It's been a fruitful podcast. This, I've really enjoyed it, and I think you just spoke there about Leeds in the Premier League. This is all ifs, by the way. We've still got 3 games to go, so But as I said multiple times, we always look into the future as football fans. What is it about Leeds that you think will, if we did go up to the Premier League, why do you think that Leeds will be sort of maybe not a sustainable Premier League club, but because no one's got a God-given right to be in the Premier League, to play in the Premier League. We know that, but we've seen that with Villa. Villa, massive club, gone up to the Premier League, and it's not really worked from them. I would personally look at Villa's philosophy. I don't know if you're sort of aligned with this, and obviously we're moving from that West Brom trajectory here to a bit of Villa and Leeds, but I'm just drawing comparisons with maybe size of clubs. But if it looks like Villa have gone up and there's been a plan, but it's been sort of surrounded with Grealish. If Grealish was taken out of that side, I mean, would they have got promoted? I mean, there's no. I mean, last season when he sort of came in, he was the catalyst for them winning. And before that, it was a bit lackadaisical. But is there a complete difference between Leeds and Villa going into that Premier League setup, do you think?
I think, you're very right to bring up that Grealish point. I mean, as a Villa fan myself, I was fully, accepting of another league and another season in the Championship. And Jack Grealish comes back against that game against Derby, comes in as captain as well. And all of a sudden, our stars aligned and everything kind of worked out from there. For Villa, they seem very different to Leeds in that respect, that everything does go through one player. And I understand, like with Pablo Hernandez, he's the player who offers a lot of quality for Leeds. But elsewhere, you have got quality as well. And I know Villa did as well, the likes of John McGinn, and they had Tammy Abraham up front. But even then, you saw when Grealish was out of the squad, Villa really did struggle. They didn't look the side that they were. And I think, this summer, whether they stay up or not, obviously, they've got a real task on their hands to do that. The likelihood is that Grealish will probably go. And that's a real big ask. I mean, in one respect, you think it could work in Villa's favour. It stops, them working through a single player who, if he's injured, if he's suspended, I mean, it's very rare that he's suspended, but if he is, then all of a sudden you think, oh, Villa are they're like lambs to the slaughter here because they don't have Jack Grealish. So it'd be interesting to see how they manage that next season. If they're in the Championship, they'll certainly be without him. There's not a chance he stays in it drops down into the Championship. I mean, he's basically an England player in waiting now. But with Leeds, for me, I mean, I see the system, I see the manager, and the style of play. I mean, you saw them against, they've played against Premier League opposition in the cups, and you've seen them, and they've put in really good performances. And I think with someone like Bielsa there, for me, they just seem to fit that Wolves kind of model almost perfectly. In the fact that they've got a manager, they've got a very specific system. I think the important thing for Leeds next season will be A, avoiding injuries, and then B, just adding talent here and there. I know people rate Patrick Bamford, and he's obviously, he suits Marcelo Bielsa's style perfectly. But in the Premier League, you need someone who's going to score you goals, and is Patrick Bamford the man to do that? I'm just not sold on him at a Premier League level. I think he's very much like your Dwight Gale kind of mould, where he's like fantastic in the Championship. Can't find a better Championship striker than him. But in the Premier League, he's not going to offer you enough, I don't think. But for Leeds, it's just important, get the recruitment right and try and avoid injuries, because the style of football that Leeds play is obviously so much passion and energy put into it. And you've seen Leeds burn out previously over the seasons, particularly under Bielsa, because of the style of football that he plays. I think it's important that you avoid injury, maybe add a bit of depth, and then just make sure you sprinkle that bit of quality here and there. And I think Leeds would be safe. And then plus you look at the Premier League this season, those bottom 6, bottom 8 clubs, I mean, they're all much of a muchness, really, aren't they? Norwich were the real kind of, slow movers. But other than that, I mean, you look all the way up to, say, a Newcastle, and you don't think there's anything particularly brilliant about those teams. Leeds against any of them teams, in a one-on-one match, I mean, where would you put your money? It's a tough one to call, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think that's where you look, don't you? If you're a club that's going up to the Premier League, you sort of look at that bottom 6, bottom 7. Could you get a couple of decent results now, more than a couple? And you think there's more space in the Premier League as well, which is going to massively help Leeds in particular. And we've seen that with Wolves in particular, definitely. And just touching on Wolves, when obviously they got promoted to the Premier League, you sort of thought you were going to see Leo Bonatini feature a lot. He was brilliant in the Championship, as you've just touched on there. Dwight Gale, Lewis Graben, and there are reasons these strikers are at the Championship, and that jump is just so vast. And I think even you've seen the likes of Tammy Abraham, not really been able to get into gear yet in the Premier League. And have you noticed, obviously, from a Villa perspective, have you just noticed how big that jump is?
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. I mean, there's players, like you said, who can do the job in the Championship, and they can be very good players in the Championship. But when you make the move to the Premier League, it's a completely different matter. I mean, defensively, it's massive because you can afford to make mistakes in the Championship and you're not punished for them. Whereas in the Premier League, Villa found out that very quickly. They played against Spurs. They went 1-0 up. They had a penalty decision go against them, and then they made a couple of mistakes. Grealish got caught with the ball in an area where it just wouldn't happen in the Championship. There wouldn't be anyone really hassling him where he was, and he turned the ball over, and suddenly Spurs have scored 3 on the bounce, and Villa were rocking. They were like, wow, 1 minute, we played really well here. We made 3 mistakes, and it's cost us 3 goals. That's the difference in the Premier League. Mistakes are punished. You need to take your chances. You can't afford to be creating numerous chances and not tucking them away. Which is obviously, the thing which I think a lot of Leeds fans might look at and be a little bit fearful of, because they dominate game after game. They create so many chances and they don't always win them. And you do wonder why is that the case? So in the Premier League, it's vital for them to find a way of taking the chances when they get them, and obviously keeping things tight at the back. I think they've got quality at the back. I don't think it needs massive surgery there. The fullbacks might need to be a little bit more defensively minded, just because you're coming up against players who they won't be coming up against in the Championship. But in general, yeah, it's a massive step up. Players can take to it. Some players don't. I mean, John McGinn, for example, pre-injury for Villa, looked brilliant. Obviously coming back from injury and has not looked the same, which you'd kind of expect from any player, really, the length of time that he was out. Jack Grealish is the one that's made the step up for Villa. It wouldn't surprise me if there's players at Leeds who make similar steps up. I think everyone's looking at Calvin Phillips as the player, for Leeds. And although he's not in a position to always score plenty of goals, I think a lot of people will see him next season. And I think that's when Leeds fans will really want to kind of make sure he's hidden away, because if Leeds do really well and Calvin Phillips does really well, or equally if Leeds finish like 16th, 17th, but Calvin Phillips is a standout player, then you're fearful of him making a move, which is not what you want. Which is a position Villa are in now, because if they do survive, or if they go down, then it's very much of okay, the Villa have got Tyrone Mings, they've got John McGinn, they've got Jack Grealish, they've got Tom Heaton. Like, these are players we can kind of cherry pick, which is a bit of a nightmare scenario, really. So, for Leeds, it's a big step up. For West Brom, it's a big step up. For Brentford, it's a big step up. But it's a big step up for every team that goes up from the Championship. I mean, Wolves are probably the only standout who didn't really need to make a massive step up, and even then they've had to add quality here and there to make sure that they were safe, and then obviously challenging for the European places.
Yeah, no, I'd completely agree with you. And Luke, I guess it's been an hour and 20, mate. I said I'd have you for 40 minutes, but I guess it's a compliment in a way.
Yeah, I'll take that, mate. Don't worry.
But yeah, we'll end it there, mate. Guys, there's 63 you're watching. Thank you so much. We're only a new channel, so thank you so much. Luke, where can everyone find you, mate?
You can catch me on Twitter. It's at @Hatfield_star. So all of our work ends up on the Express and Star website.
Great stuff, mate. If anyone obviously isn't subscribed, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Luke, I'd like to do it again with you, mate. Maybe at the end of the season we can share a beer and do it over a stream, mate.
Fingers crossed we'll be celebrating, not consoling ourselves, right?
Yeah, exactly, man, exactly. And as I said, if you guys haven't liked the video already, please go ahead and do so, and I'll share it on the socials. But yeah, thanks again for watching, guys, and we'll see you in a bit.